Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel for a brand new mystery with Molly. If you are new around here, if you have never seen my face on your screen before, then hi, my name is Molly and I post true crime videos like this every single week. So if you think that is something that you might want to stick around for, then please do subscribe and don't forget to switch on the little notification bells that YouTube will let you know whenever I post a new video. This week we are going to be talking about the case of Lindsay Buziak. She was a bright and beautiful young woman who was brutally murdered in early 2008. When Lindsay's body was found and a murder investigation was launched by police, they weren't really sure on potential suspects and theories as to what might have happened. But despite that, Lindsay's case actually remains unsolved to this day. No one has ever been definitively linked to the crime. No one has faced punishment for her death, which is why her family are still working so incredibly hard, even more than 14 years later, to get answers and bring those responsible to justice. Lindsay's father has set up a GoFundMe page to help fund the investigation into his daughter's murder, and that will be linked in the description box if any of you would like to make a donation. But if you are unable to donate any money at the moment, even just sharing the GoFundMe page to your social media platforms I'm sure would help so much. Before we get into the case, please listen carefully to the following. This video is about the murder of a young woman and it involves heavy themes such as violence towards women, and the theme of sexual assault is briefly mentioned. Viewer discretion is advised. So for this week's case, we are going back more than 14 years now to early 2008 in the capital city of Victoria, which is located in British Columbia in Canada. And this is Lindsay Elizabeth Buziak. She was a 24-year-old woman and she was born on the 2nd of November 1983. Her father was named Jeff, her mother was named Evelyn, and Lindsay was one of two children. She had a sister named Sarah, and Lindsay had lived in Victoria in Canada her whole life. She grew up there and she was described by her friends and family as just being such a wonderful human being. She had such an incredible personality. She was kind and caring, she was funny, everyone that knew her just adored her. She was so loved. Her father Jeff actually used the word spectacular when he was describing his daughter. He said that she was so vibrant and vivacious. She had grown up to be such a lovely young woman. She was very close with her family, including her sister Sarah. They were sisters, but they were also just really good friends. In fact, something that made me smile was that Sarah said in a documentary that I watched about this case that one time Lindsay actually set up a page on Facebook called People Who Love Sarah As Much As I Do, and she would add people to the page so that they could all say nice things about Sarah, and she would talk about what she loved about Sarah and how close they were. And I think that in itself just shows how much of a nice person Lindsay was. She just seemed like such a genuine good human being. Lindsay was also the type who made friends really easily. She had a lot of friends who she loved spending time with, and at the time that this case took place, she also had a boyfriend. She was in a relationship with a man named Jason Zailo. He worked as a mortgage broker and they had been together for about a year by early 2008. They were living together and Jason described his girlfriend as someone who was just always happy. She always had a smile on her face and she just made him feel alive. He really adored Lindsay. So it seemed as though they had a really good relationship, and as well as this, Lindsay also had a very good job. She was an estate agent and she worked for a real estate company in Canada called Remax, and this was really a dream for her. It was her ambition to get into real estate, and I think one of the main reasons for this was because of her dad, Jeff. He was also in real estate and she really looked up to him, so she wanted to follow in his footsteps. There were a few people in her life that worked in real estate actually. Lindsay's boyfriend Jason had a real estate license. Jason's mother Shirley was also in the same business. I believe she actually worked for the same company as Lindsay for Remax. So Lindsay had decided that it was the right career path for her too, and she had been working at Remax for about a year by the time this case occurred, and it was going well. She loved her job. She was really enjoying it. And in early 2008, she was very excited when she received a call from a client who was looking to purchase a property through her very soon. Around the end of January 2008, Lindsay received a call from a woman who said that she and her partner, her husband, were looking to move from Vancouver to Victoria, and she said that it was quite urgent. They were looking to buy within literally the next couple of days. She said that they wanted somewhere that was ready to go, ready for someone to move in immediately. They wanted at least 3 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms. They wanted a big master bedroom. They wanted it to be located within about 20 minutes of the town centre. The woman was pretty specific about what they wanted. So Lindsay was taking note of it all. She was writing it all down in her planner. And another thing that the woman said was that they were looking for houses that cost around like $1 million. So clearly this couple were very wealthy, and I think this was the main reason why this was quite exciting for Lindsay, because obviously if you can sell a house in literally a few days that is worth a hell of a lot of money, then I would imagine that that reflects very well on the estate agent that sells it. But as well as being quite excited about this call, Lindsay was also a little apprehensive, I think. She expressed to her father Jeff that there was something a bit odd about this phone call that she had with this woman, and that was that the woman had an accent. She spoke English but with an accent. However, Lindsay said that she almost felt as though the woman was putting the accent on. She described it as being like a Spanish or Mexican accent, but that it almost sounded fake to her, which obviously seemed strange. I mean, why would someone be faking an accent to an estate agent? Another thing that she thought was quite strange was that the woman didn't get in touch with Lindsay via the Remax real estate company that she worked for. She didn't ring their company number. The woman rang Lindsay's personal number. She rang her own mobile, which Lindsay didn't use for work, which confused Lindsay. How did this client get her personal phone number? She actually asked the woman on the phone how she had it, and apparently she said something along the lines of, "Oh, I know one of your other clients and they gave me your number." According to sources, Lindsay did try to get in touch with her other clients and ask if they gave this woman her number, but apparently she had no luck with that. So yeah, there were a few things about this phone call that seemed quite odd, but regardless, she got to work on trying to find some houses for sale which she thought might have been of interest to this couple. And eventually she found one. It was a big house that was for sale in a suburb in Victoria called Saanich, which seemed to have everything that the couple wanted. And so she set up a viewing with them so that they could take a look around, and this viewing was arranged for Saturday the 2nd of February 2008 at 5:30 p.m. Eventually that Saturday rolled around and Lindsay had been out with her boyfriend Jason that day. That afternoon they'd gone for a late lunch together at a restaurant called Source, and then after paying the bill at around 4:24 p.m. they said goodbye because Jason was headed to an auto shop to drop off a contract and also pick up a friend, and Lindsay was headed to the house viewing in Saanich. Now Jason had actually arranged to meet Lindsay there because, as I mentioned before, she was a little bit apprehensive about this viewing, a little bit nervous, and so Jason said that after he had dropped off the contract and done what he needed to do, he would head to the house and just wait for her so that she knew he was outside if she needed him. So yeah, they said goodbye at the restaurant, went their separate ways, and Lindsay drove to the house. She was texting Jason when she got there as she was waiting for the couple to arrive, who she actually referred to as the Mexicans because of the woman's accent on the phone. From what I can gather, Lindsay never actually got their name. She didn't get the woman's name on the phone. But when the couple arrived, she texted Jason saying that she had to go, and he said that he would be there in about 10-15 minutes or so. So the couple arrived, they met Lindsay outside of the property and they shook hands with her. This interaction was seen by a few witnesses who were standing nearby, and then the three of them headed towards the front door so that Lindsay could show them around. She used the lockbox to get the key, opened the door, and the three of them went inside. Little did Lindsay know the danger that she was in now now that she was inside the house with these clients, people that she thought were clients, because as it would turn out, 24-year-old Lindsay Buziak would not make it out of that house alive. At 5:38 p.m. that evening, Jason was in his car with a friend of his, and he was on his way to the house where Lindsay was doing the viewing, and he sent her a text message saying, quote, "just a couple of minutes away," a message that Lindsay never replied to or even opened. Now, this account going forward is what the police were later told by Jason. This is his version of events from that day. So about 7 minutes after that last text, at around 5:45 p.m, Jason said that he and his friend pulled onto the road where the house was, and he looked towards the front door of the home. Now, the front door was one of those doors that kind of had like foggy glass windows. You know, the ones where it's not clear and you can see straight through it, it's slightly blurry, so you can see slightly what's going on behind it, but not clearly, if that makes sense. Like this kind of door on screen right now. Anyway, Jason looked towards the front door, and he described how he could see what he believed were two people standing in the entranceway as if they were about to open the door and leave the house. Some sources state that he saw the two people kind of open the door and then immediately close it again just as Jason drove by. But whatever the case, he clearly didn't think much of it at the time, probably just thought that it was Lindsay's clients about to go. So he turned and parked on the main road, which was just out of view of the house, and then he waited for Lindsay to come out. However, she never did. He and his friend were waiting and waiting, and Lindsay didn't come out of the house into the car. And she also wasn't responding to Jason's messages. He was texting her saying, "Are you okay?" but she didn't reply. So Jason was a little bit concerned at this point, and so he got out of the car and walked towards the property, and when he looked through the window, he saw Lindsay's shoes on the floor. Again, he didn't really think much of it because most estate agents will take off their shoes when they are showing clients around houses. But then he went to open the front door and he couldn't. The door was locked, which just made him worry even more that Lindsay was still in that house. She wasn't responding to messages, and the door was locked. He couldn't get in to see if she was all right. And at around 4 minutes past 6, Jason actually decided to call the police, call 911, because he needed to get into the home. But as they were waiting for the police to arrive, Jason and his friend noticed that a door to the side of the property was open slightly. So he helped his friend over this big fence, and the friend was able to get into the house via this side door. When he got in the house, he opened the front door to let Jason in, and Jason began shouting Lindsay's name, but there was no answer. So he ran up the stairs and he began looking around, and he quickly found Lindsay, but when he did find her, she was dead. Jason found his girlfriend lying on the floor in the master bedroom of the house, and she was covered, absolutely covered in blood from where she had been viciously stabbed with a knife over and over again. Lindsay Buziak had been brutally murdered inside of this home, and as soon as Jason made this horrifying discovery, he called 911 again, and he also tried to give Lindsay CPR to revive her, but it wasn't working. She was already gone. Even paramedics could not save Lindsay when they got to the home, and shortly after their arrival, she was pronounced dead at the scene. As I said, her cause of death was stab wounds. She had been stabbed repeatedly all over her body. She'd sustained more than 40 stab wounds to her body, mainly in her head and her chest area. She'd been stabbed so many times in her chest that her breasts had basically been mutilated, and her throat had been slit. As I said, this was such a violent and vicious attack. The stab wounds indicated that she had been attacked with just one knife, although the murder weapon was not found at the crime scene. And interestingly, she didn't really have any defensive wounds to her body, which suggested to the police that she didn't know she was about to be attacked. She was probably attacked from behind and therefore didn't have a chance to fight back and defend herself. She hadn't been sexually assaulted, which seemed to rule out a sexual motive to the killing, and also nothing had been stolen from her. Lindsay still had her purse and her phone and everything with her, so that also seemed to rule out a robbery motive. But it wasn't long before the police had their first suspect in the case. When Lindsay's body was found, and this was officially a homicide investigation, the police identified Lindsay's own boyfriend, Jason, as a potential suspect. He was the one who found Lindsay's body, but did he really just find her? Or did he in fact have something to do with her murder? Well, when the police looked into him a bit more, they did find that he may have had a possible motive. It turns out that at the time of Lindsay's murder, her relationship with Jason was on the rocks. In fact, less than 2 months before her death, Lindsay had expressed to her father Jeff that she wasn't very happy with Jason anymore because she just felt like he could be quite demanding and controlling sometimes, and apparently he could be quite jealous, and she just didn't want to be with him anymore. She told her dad that she was planning to leave him, and she told some of her friends the same thing, that she was going to break up with Jason. So was that a motive? If Jason was the killer, did he get angry that Lindsay was going to leave him, so angry that he decided to murder her? But it wasn't just this possible motive Jason may have had that made people feel a little suspicious of him. They were also suspicious because they noticed that after Lindsay's murder, Jason seemed to be almost emotionless. He wasn't seen crying or getting upset or angry or anything, even though the woman that he loved had just been killed in such a brutal way. Of course, people do grieve in different ways. Everyone shows their emotions differently and they handle things differently. But yeah, that combined with the fact that Lindsay wasn't totally happy in the relationship made people, Lindsay's family included, a little bit skeptical of Jason Zailo. So he was considered a suspect by the police in the beginning, and he was questioned and interviewed at length, as was his friend who he was with that day at the house. But the police never found any evidence which linked him to the crime, and they could prove that he was telling the truth about his movements that day. They obviously had his friend who corroborated his story, but they also had CCTV footage of Jason and his friend getting into Jason's car, I believe after he went to the auto shop around 5:30 p.m. on the day that Lindsay died. He was spotted getting in his car and then driving away. As we know, he was on his way to the house to meet Lindsay, and he messaged her saying that he would be there in about 10 or 15 minutes. Now, the police had put the time of the murder at around 5:41 p.m. They believed that that's when Lindsay was attacked in the house, and the reason for this was because at that time, 5:41 p.m, Lindsay's mobile in her pocket had called a number in her phone contact, and it's believed that this was a pocket dial. She didn't actually mean to call this number, but as she was probably lying on the ground whilst the attack was happening, as she was moving, buttons on her phone had been pressed and this number had been called. So that was more evidence which seemed to indicate that Jason was not the killer, because if the police were right and the murder did occur at 5:41 p.m, he was nowhere near the scene yet. He was still a few minutes away from arriving at the house. In addition to that, his fingerprints in the house matched up with what he said his movements were. In fact, a few days after the murder, Jason was brought back to the house so that he could talk the police through exactly what he did, his exact steps. And like I said, what he told the police matched up with evidence found at the crime scene. So for example, he said that when he got into the house, he touched the bottom of the banister before he ran upstairs to find Lindsay, and his fingerprints on the banister matched up perfectly with that. So evidence could prove that he wasn't the one who carried out the attack, but then it was theorized whether or not he still could have been involved in the planning. Maybe he wasn't the one who killed Lindsay, but perhaps he orchestrated it. Maybe he got someone else to kill her. But again, the police never found any evidence to support this theory, and apparently Jason has always been very cooperative with the police. He's answered all questions, he's been happy to talk to them, he's passed a lie detector test. Ultimately, the police were confident that he was not responsible for Lindsay's murder, and eventually he was pretty much ruled out of the investigation. Detectives have announced that they no longer consider Jason Zailo a suspect. Another person of interest or suspect in the case was an ex-boyfriend of Lindsay's. His name was Matt McDuff, and she was with him for about 5 years. They split up 2 years prior to to this case taking place in 2006, and it seems as though their relationship was quite similar to Lindsay's relationship with Jason, in the sense that it was quite rocky. They were up and down a lot, they argued quite often, so they eventually broke up. And according to sources, they hadn't spoken for several months by February of 2008 when Lindsay was killed. However, despite that, Lindsay's current boyfriend Jason, his mother Shirley, actually claimed that just the day before Lindsay was killed, Lindsay had confided in her that she was a little bit scared of her ex-boyfriend Matt McDuff. Shirley claimed that Lindsay didn't go into detail, she didn't really say why she felt this way, just that she was quite scared of him. However, it is important to note that Shirley is the only one who has ever come forward with this statement that Lindsay was scared of Matt. And I'm not accusing her of lying about it, but she is the mother of the man Lindsay was currently dating at the time of her murder, Jason, who, as we know, was a prime suspect in the beginning. So it's been theorized that maybe to try and protect her own son from suspicion, she perhaps could have been lying about this to try and make Matt look like he could be guilty of something, but there is nothing to prove this, it's just been speculated. What is odd though is that while Shirley claimed that Lindsay was scared of Matt, many other people in her life, like some of her friends and even her dad Jeff, said that from their understanding it was the opposite. Apparently, even while she was with Jason, Lindsay had confided in friends and family that she missed her ex-boyfriend Matt. She told her father Jeff just weeks before she was murdered that she felt quite confused about her feelings because there was almost a part of her that never got over Matt. So there seems to be mixed reports from people about how Lindsay may have felt about Matt in the lead up to her death, but regardless, he was an ex, so the police did look into the possibility that Matt may have been involved in her murder. But ultimately, he, just like Jason Zailo, was basically eliminated as a suspect because there was nothing to link him to it, and they were actually able to prove that he was nowhere near the crime scene that day. So if it wasn't Lindsay's current boyfriend Jason and it wasn't Lindsay's ex-boyfriend Matt, then who was it? Who killed Lindsay Buziak that day, and why? Why did they want her dead? Well, all evidence seems to point to the clients, that couple that Lindsay had arranged the house viewing with that day. It seemed as though they followed her into the home, followed her upstairs to the master bedroom, and there, whilst Lindsay's back was turned, they attacked. And the police did have a description of what this couple, this man and woman, looked like, because if you recall from earlier on in the video, when Lindsay met with them outside of the house in Saanich, she was seen by a few witnesses who were nearby shaking their hands. These witnesses described the man as being white, he had dark hair, he was around 6 foot tall, and he was apparently well dressed. And there is actually a composite sketch of the woman. She was described as being white, she had blonde hair which was quite short, she was estimated to be aged around 35 to 40, she was wearing a colourful distinctive dress, possibly similar to this dress on screen. And as we know from what Lindsay said from the phone call that she had with this woman, she had a Spanish or Mexican accent, though she thought at the time that it was fake, which that in itself says a lot. If the woman was faking an accent on the phone to Lindsay, why? Why was she doing that? Was she doing it to try and throw the police off her tracks after the murder because they would think that they needed to look for someone with a Spanish accent when in fact the real killer didn't have one? But going back to the call that Lindsay had had with this woman prior to the murder, obviously, as we know, as she was speaking to the woman, she was taking down notes in her planner of what kind of home the couple were looking for, and Lindsay also took down their number. So I imagine this must have been quite promising for the police initially. They thought that if they could trace the number, they'd be able to trace the woman that made the phone call. But when they did trace the number, they actually discovered that the mobile that made the calls to Lindsay was a burner phone. Police discovered that the phone had been bought from a convenience store in Vancouver a few months before Lindsay's death, and it had been paid for in cash, not by card, so the police couldn't identify the person who bought the phone. The caller had also registered the phone under a fake name, and despite purchasing it months earlier, the phone was only activated about 48 hours before Lindsay was murdered. I think on or around the same day that they they first contacted her, which indicates that this murder was planned, carefully so. The killers had gone through the effort of buying a burner phone, which they knew the police wouldn't be able to trace back to them, which of course just made the police even more confident that this couple had to have been the killers, and yet they were still no closer to finding out their identities. Unfortunately, as I understand it, no trace of their DNA was found in the home, no unidentified fingerprints or anything, so perhaps they were wearing gloves when they entered the house. Maybe they were just really careful not to touch anything, which again suggests that this crime was so carefully planned and so well executed. The killers were clearly very forensically aware. They didn't seem to leave any trace of them at all. Does that mean that maybe this wasn't the first time that they had committed murder? Were they experienced killers? What if they were hitmen? What if they had been paid by someone to carry out Lindsay's murder? It seems to be the case that Lindsay did not know the identity of her killers, because obviously she didn't recognize the woman's voice on the phone. And also, remember, the witnesses said that when Lindsay greeted them outside of the home that day, she shook their hands as if she was meeting them for the first time. And there was no evidence to indicate that she felt as though she was in any danger by going into the house with them. You know, she didn't message or call her boyfriend Jason after she met them, or decide to wait for him to arrive till they went inside the home. So it doesn't seem as though she knew them and was scared of them or anything. It does appear as though they were strangers to Lindsay. But then what motive would two strangers have for wanting to brutally kill this young woman? Well, maybe it was money, a hell of a lot of money. Like I said, maybe they were paid by someone that did know Lindsay and hated her for some reason and wanted her dead, and so they found two hitmen who could carry out the murder for them. As I understand it, this is the theory that the police in particular believe the most. They don't believe that this was just a random killing. They believe that this was a hit. Lindsay was targeted for a reason. They just had to work out what that reason was. So in an effort to find out, they began looking deeper into Lindsay's background, into her life, trying to determine whether she was perhaps involved in anything a bit dodgy or illegal. Did she owe someone money for something? Was she involved in drugs, etc, etc? But when the police spoke to everyone in Lindsay's life, her friends and family, they all said no, absolutely not. That just wasn't Lindsay. In fact, her ex-boyfriend Matt described her as being, quote, the cleanest girl you could ever meet. And there was also no evidence to support this theory either. Lindsay had no criminal record. She'd never been arrested before, I don't believe. They had no evidence to suggest that she'd ever taken drugs. Apparently she did have some friends and associates that were involved in the drug scene, but she herself was not at all. However, although Lindsay herself did not take drugs, there is a big theory in this case that Lindsay might have ratted someone else out, someone who was involved in drugs, to the police, and that she was killed as revenge for this. Now, this theory emerged because just a couple of months before Lindsay's murder in December of 2007, Lindsay had actually travelled all the way from Victoria to Calgary, which is a city in Alberta in Canada. Her father Jeff lived in Calgary, so she went there to visit him, and what the police discovered was that also during her time in Alberta, she got in touch with two old friends of hers, two men that she had been friends with since she was a child, and she had a conversation with them. She spoke to them on the phone and via Facebook. Now, just a month after this, after her visit to Alberta in January of 2008, so just the month before her murder, the biggest ever drug bust in Alberta history happened. An illegal drug trafficking operation was uncovered by police where 67 kilograms of cocaine was found, which in total was worth more than $6 million. And according to sources, 14 people in total were arrested and charged in relation to this crime. Now, how this could potentially link back to Lindsay Buziak is that one of the people that was involved in this drug trafficking operation, a man named Erickson de l'Alcazar, was apparently related to one of the men that she got back in touch with during her visit to Alberta just the month before the drug bust was discovered. He was related to that old friend of Lindsay's. Erickson was one of the many that was arrested and charged in relation to this crime, and it turns out that the only reason the police uncovered this whole operation was because of a police informant. Someone had gone to the police and told them about these drugs. So it was theorized that maybe that person was Lindsay. Maybe during her visit to Alberta, her old friend told her that his relative Erickson was involved in this huge cocaine operation. Or maybe he didn't tell her and Lindsay was just able to put the pieces together and she went to the police. Now, the police have confirmed that this is not true. Lindsay was not the informant. It wasn't her who told the police. But of course, at the time of her murder, the people involved in this crime, the drug cartel, did not know that. They just knew that someone had snitched, but they didn't know for sure who. But perhaps they theorized that it was Lindsay Buziak because of her connection to one of the members' relatives, and so they decided to get revenge on her by hiring hitmen to carry out her murder. Almost like a case of mistaken identity. They mistook Lindsay as being the police informant when she wasn't. But by the time that was revealed, it was too late. Lindsay was already dead. Now, from what I can gather, the police have found no solid evidence to prove this theory, but I guess there's also no solid evidence to disprove it either. So it is still a huge theory in this case to this day. It's quite a controversial theory too, I think. A lot of people believe this theory. They believe that Lindsay's murder was organised by this drug cartel, whereas others don't believe it so much. I definitely think that it is a possibility. The only issue that I personally have with this theory is, well, I've said it a few times now, but Lindsay was not the police informant. She was not the one who told the police. So what evidence would this drug cartel have had to lead them to believe that it was her when it wasn't? Was it literally just her old friend who was a relative of someone involved in the crime may have told them that Lindsay could have been the one who snitched? But then so many people were involved in this operation. Surely any one of their associates could have been the police informant. So why was Lindsay killed? What made them so sure that she was the one who snitched? Did they just think, well, it could have been her, so we'll murder her just in case? I don't know if I worded that in the right way, but please do let me know in the comments what you think about this theory, your opinions. There's another theory that I saw floating around online that perhaps someone Lindsay worked with at the real estate company Remax may have been responsible for this crime, but again, there is no solid evidence to prove this. But the theory that this was a targeted hit is still widely believed to this day. It's believed that someone that knew Lindsay ordered hitmen to kill her. We just still don't know the identity of the hitmen, the couple, or the identity of the individual who hired them. The police have continued to work on this case over the years. They've conducted hundreds of interviews and questionings. They've looked into several suspects, investigated several lines of inquiry. They've looked into the tips and leads that they've received from the public. They've done media appeals. Lindsay's family have done appeals, and they've put forward a huge reward for information leading to the conviction of her killer or killers. But sadly, even to this day, they still don't have answers as to who did this to Lindsay and why. But police have said in recent years that this is far from a cold case. They have not given up. They're still actively investigating this case. In fact, according to a few sources, in February of 2021, so just last year, the Saanich Police Department announced that they did have some fresh leads in the case thanks to advancements in DNA and forensic technology. I wonder if perhaps that means they were able to detect some trace of the killer's DNA from evidence, because obviously at the time of Lindsay's murder, they weren't able to find any trace of the killer's DNA at the crime scene or on her body, I don't think. I have wondered whether or not they were able to find any trace of the killer's DNA from Lindsay's hands, because obviously, as we know from the witnesses, she shook their hands when she greeted them outside of the house that day. So maybe their DNA was on her hands unless they were wearing gloves. But as I mentioned, at the time of her murder, it doesn't seem as though they found any trace of the killer's DNA. But that statement that the police released last year indicates that maybe they do have the killer's DNA now. But I guess that could mean anything. They obviously didn't go into detail, and I unfortunately don't have any more information information on these fresh leads. So I don't know if anything came of them, if the police are still working on them today, or if they perhaps just resulted in dead ends. But even in 2022, the investigation continues, as well as the police. Lindsay's loved ones also haven't given up. Her father, Jeff, in particular, has vowed to never, ever give up the search for answers until the day that he dies. Like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, Jeff has set up a fundraiser, a GoFundMe page, which he hopes will help fund a few things that could help Lindsay's case. For example, he wants to hire a private investigator to look into the case. He wants to set up a tip line, a confidential tip line just for people who might know something about Lindsay's murder. He wants to use the donations to help pay for the creations of posters and social media posts, etc, etc. As I understand it, Jeff has used a hell of a lot of his own money to fund resources used in Lindsay's case so far. But of course, money runs out eventually, and he's also currently fighting a lawsuit which a lot of his money is going to. I believe he's currently being sued for defamation by Zailo, Lindsay's boyfriend Jason's mother. And from what I can gather, the reason she is suing Jeff is because Jeff actually has a website which he set up called LindsayBuziakMurder.com, where anyone can leave comments about their theories and who they think could have been responsible for Lindsay's death. And apparently the Zailo family have been discussed as potential suspects heavily on there. They've been accused of murder, and they've described how they have been the targets of relentless online attacks on this website, which is owned by Jeff. Jeff wasn't necessarily the one who made these comments, but the website is owned by him. I don't want to talk too much about that because I want to keep this video about Lindsay and her story, but he is being sued for defamation, which I imagine is costing a lot, so he is asking for donations to help fund the search for Lindsay's killer. So the link to the GoFundMe page will be in the description box if you would like to make a contribution. I'm sure it would mean so much to Lindsay's family. But even if you aren't in a position to be able to donate any money at the moment, just sharing the GoFundMe page on your social media would be so helpful. So please, even if you can't donate, share it to your Facebook or your Instagram or Twitter, or share it with someone that might be in a position to be able to donate a little bit of money. But that concludes this case. That is the unsolved case of Lindsay Buziak. It's been more than 14 years since Lindsay's horrific murder, and still no one has faced any punishment. Lindsay has never received justice, which is just heartbreaking and so unfair. My heart really goes out to Lindsay's family. I honestly cannot imagine how awful it's been for them to go this long with still no answers, and I think that their strength and their determination to never give up the search for Lindsay's killers is just incredible and truly inspiring. But yeah, that is it for this video. As always, please do let me know your thoughts and opinions on the case in the comments. I will of course keep you guys updated should any further updates about this case come out. Please do give the video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you again next week for another mystery with Molly. Bye!